Hi, welcome back to my channel and part two of my look through what I think are the best films of the 21st century so far, and I'm doing it in chronological order. So we reach 2011 now, and Abbas Kiarostami's Certified Copy. Now this saw Abbas Kiarostami, a famous Iranian filmmaker. He left Iran and he ended up in Italy with the French actress Juliette Binoche. She'd already played a cameo in his film Shirin. Now, this is a very interesting film, very odd film. It's about an English art critic. He's doing a tour of Italy. And he's written a book called Certified Copy. And it's about how copies in art can be as beautiful as the real thing. So, what's the difference between them, right? If there's a brilliant fake, why can't that be judged as beautiful as the real thing? What makes a work of art? Juliette Binoche plays a woman who owns a gallery in the local area, and she's attracted to this art critic. And so she asks him out on a date. And they go out on this date, and they're sort of slightly awkward with each other. And there's a tension builds, and they start getting angry with each other. And you think, wow, this is a bit weird. Then they have a coffee. He goes out to take a call. And the owner of the cafe starts talking to Juliette Binoche as if the guy's her husband, right? She's made a mistake. But then he comes back in. And they start acting like husband and wife. And they start talking to each other as if they've known each other for ages. They go to a restaurant and they have a row, a sort of middle-aged couple row. And then they go back to a bedroom where they might be reunited. What's going on? Which is the truth and which is the copy? Are they really strangers? Or have they really been married a long time? Are they play acting? What's going on here? In a sense, what Kiarostami is doing is trying to portray an entire marriage in one day, right? It's a conceit that could have been rather gauche or trite in someone else's hand. But in Kiarostami's, it's a film that's equally light and funny and disturbing. It kind of gets under your skin. More than any other Kiarostami film, this gets under my skin. It's probably not as formally and thematically ambitious as some of his movies, but for some reason it's the one that I find the most memorable, and I'm not quite sure why. It's a study of men and women and how they relate to each other. And I think that what I want to say about this movie, some people might think this is a bit pretentious, but it's a very awkward, clumsy movie. You have these awkward transitions between them being nice to each other, polite, tense, and then being very familiar. But that's part of how the movie works. That's part of how it's disturbing your sense. It's showing you the truth of a relationship. You start out not knowing anything, as we, the audience, don't know anything. Where does that familiarity and knowledge come? What does it consist of? Do you really understand each other's emotions? So therefore, can you portray these people as being in a smooth relationship? Perhaps the steps of our relationships are jagged. Perhaps they are clumsy. And perhaps that's what this film shows so well. How well do we really know each other? And I think this is an extraordinary movie. It takes a bit of patience, and it's a bit uncomfortable in places, but that's part of how it works, I think. It's an extraordinary movie. Now, what I love about cinema is transitions, differences, contrasts. So we go from that very respectable film by a major auteur to Kill List. Yes, indeed. A brutal, nasty British horror film in which a man takes a hammer and batters another man to death. That's cinema, isn't it? Why do I like Kill List so much? For those people who don't know about it, it's a British horror movie in which two hitmen in the Midlands, rather dull area of England, are hired to assassinate a group of seemingly random people. But there seems to be a connection, this kind of secret cult. And the reason I fell in love with this movie, it's a brilliant piece of genre. It's very sharp, it's very jagged. But I'm an old horror fan, and I love folk horror, and I love, the Hammer horror films and the Amicus horror films of the past. And I'd always associated cult horror with the past, with the 60s and 70s, with Eastman colour, grainy shots of the English countryside, with the past, basically. And suddenly, here was a folk horror movie from the modern day that I knew I was going to embrace as passionately, and was going to be part of my cult landscape forevermore. And that's why this movie means so much to me. When Ben Wheatley appeared, he was a fantastic new voice in British cinema. He was a filmmaker who was taking British genres like the gangster movie in his first film, Down Terrace, which he made in about 7 days in a terraced house, and is a really sharp and funny blackly comic gangster movie if you've never seen it. And then he did the same with the folk horror film. Then he did it again with A Field in England, which is a really sort of weirdy-beardy Civil War meets drug hallucination movie. It's wonderful. After that, I think he disappeared up his own bum. I think he believed in his own hype a bit too much, and I think he's really dwindled as a filmmaker. But this remains an extraordinarily raw and savage experience and a really great horror movie. And its ambiguity, which annoys some people, I think is its strength. You never quite know what this cult is about. Next, the Turing Horse. Bellatar's last great statement, his last great finger to the world before he retired and ran a filmmaking academy in Sarajevo. It starts out from the story about Friedrich Nietzsche. One day Friedrich Nietzsche apparently went out into a square and he saw this man beating his horse with a whip, and he threw his arms around the horse to protect the horse, and he burst into tears. Well, Bellatar, he takes the story forwards with the guy who owns the horse, and we see him take the horse back to his crappy little cottage out in this blasted heath, and just he and his daughter live this meagre existence, basically living off potatoes in this dreadful, howling, windswept landscape. And that's it for 2 hours. And slowly but surely, everything starts to fall apart, degrade, erode. The horse stops working, and you just see its face staring blankly into the camera. His daughter stops speaking to him. The food starts becoming less and less on the plate. Suddenly the light gives out. No noise, no light, darkness, the end. Boom. Full stop. The universe just dissipates completely. And when I saw this film, I felt it was a kind of full stop to the great journey of European art house cinema since, Rossellini's Rome Open City in the post-war period. It felt like the end. This was the last great statement by an auteur director on the human condition, saying, this is what I see, how I see the world, this is it. I think in times since, there's almost an intellectual, academic frowning on such perceived arrogance, one man saying, this is what I think of the universe. I miss that. Art house cinema since then seems a little bit tentative, at least in Europe. And this is a great, epic statement, a great big howl, a wail of despair in the darkness. But if that makes it sound like bleakly miserabilist, well, this is the most bleakly miserabilist film ever made, and it takes bleak miserabilism into an epic, almost transcendental sort of register, and that's what makes it sort of strangely beautiful. There are scenes in this film that will haunt you for days. A little girl's face looking out of a window into a howling landscape, just like a moon in the night sky. Extraordinary. The eyes of the horse staring at you blankly. Incredible film. Another director who decided to make a statement about the human condition and life was Terrence Malick. Now, Terrence Malick, up until The Tree of Life, he was a director who was revered like some kind of god or pope of American cinema. He took genres like Kubrick and completely did his own thing with them. So he took the guy and a girl with a gun story and he made Badlands. He took the sort of farming saga and he made Days of Heaven. Thin Red Line was his war movie, and then he made his Pocahontas movie. Then he made this, and it split the critics down the middle. What was this? Like all these, shots, in the magic hour, slow motion shots of the sunlight in the trees, people whispering on the soundtrack. Who are you? What is love? Where are we? And people thought, what the fuck is this? A car advert? What has Terrence Malick done? He's lost his mind. He's gone mad. And as it went on in the films afterwards, To the Wonder, Knight of Cups, all of which I like, people thought he'd gone even crazier. And he got abandoned. This great pope of cinema became this kind of drunken has-been in an alleyway. And there are some of us who think that that is a lie, that actually this film is an extraordinary masterpiece. And actually what it really is it's Malick discovering the form and the voice he'd always wanted to speak in all his life. Genre was a trap for Malick. It wasn't the great foundation that it seemed to have been, it was a trap. He got rid of that trap with The Tree of Life, and he made a purely autobiographical, purely formally free poem about life and God. He's a religious filmmaker and philosophy, going back to his own childhood in 1950s America, with Brad Pitt playing the father and Jessica Chastain playing the mother. There are elements of Tarkovsky in this, with the mother floating and levitating above the ground. It's a film that demands a bit of patience. I know it won't be for everybody, but I was blown away by it. At first, when it was heralded at Cannes, I avoided it like the plague, because I thought all these disciples of Malick going, oh my God, Malick's made a new film, oh my God. And so I avoided it like the plague, because I never really liked Malick before this. But then it got voted the best film of the year, and there was all sorts of critical debates about it. So I thought, I'll watch it and see what I think. And I was absolutely blown away. And I love the next two movies, To the Wonder and Knight of Cups. I don't care who knows it. Great film. Now, the next film I want to talk about, I have not been able to locate on DVD or Blu-ray. And if anyone out there knows where I can get a copy with good English subtitles, I will love you forever. It's a German film, and it's called Sleeping Sickness. I think it's called something like Schalkenfreit in German. And it's by a director called Ulrich Köhler, who is very little known in the UK. But this film actually was voted as one of the 10 best films of the year in 2011, I think, by CinemaScope magazine, a very good Canadian film magazine. I think this film is extraordinary, and it gives you everything that people seem to want in modern day art house. It's bifurcated, it's split in two like an Apichatpong film. The first part is set in an African country, which was an ex-German colony. So it's a post-colonial story. And there's this doctor operating there, this white German doctor. And it's about his life in this colony, this ex-colony, and the compromises he has to make and the people he knows, and trying to set up his practice. Then the film cuts. You move to France, and the medical organisation in charge of this doctor have heard that there's something wrong. So it's a bit like Kurtz in Heart of Darkness, right? And they send out this black French doctor. The race of the doctors is quite important in the story. And they send him out there to see what the hell is going on, right? So this black doctor goes into this African country to experience his own Heart of Darkness, to see that this white doctor has gone a bit crazy and has relationships with the native peoples that are perhaps questionable. And it all ends with a hippopotamus. I don't want to spoil it any more than that. It's a remarkable film. It mixes up documentary realism with wry humour, quite a dark, wry look at the German life, the German post-colonial life in that country, with fantasy images in a fantasy sense like you find in Apichatpong or so on and so forth. So why it hasn't become more of a famous film, I have no idea. Perhaps because it's German, perhaps because people are not aware of this director. I don't know. But it's a really superb film. If you get a chance to see it on streaming or whatever, watch it. It's fantastic. And if you do know of a copy out there, please let me know. My next choice is a British film. Now, I must tell you a little story about this film. I used to work I worked in a subtitling department, still do. But I also did a bit of audio description, describing films and TV shows for the blind, right? And one day, one of my colleagues, we sometimes talked about movies, and he said to me, he said, God, Mike, I'm describing this film at the moment. It epitomises everything that people hate about art movies. It's terrible. And he described this film to me in withering terms. Flash forward about 2 months. I'm at the London Film Festival, and I go and see the latest film by Joanna Hogg, Exhibition. I'd previously really enjoyed her first two films, Unrelated and Archipelago. And I'm watching the movie, the audience is sighing a bit with boredom. And I suddenly realised about halfway through, this is the film he was talking about. And I loved it. I loved every single second of it. The thing is, I do understand why people don't like this film. It is a bit of a difficult film. Okay, it's a bit of a... Is it a curate's egg? Is that the phrase? It stars a real-life musician and artist, and they're playing a couple, and they live in this very modernist, kind of brutalist architecture house in London. And they have a floor to themselves, so she does her little bit of artwork downstairs, and he does his bit of artwork upstairs. And they're both kind of like performance artists. They're sort of gallery artists, right? And she uses her body as her main sort of material, right? So she's a conceptual artist, and she's working on this project of exposing herself. So she keeps exposing herself, stands on a table and exposing herself to the people outside. And then in the film, she's exposed in the bed as she masturbates next to her husband, naked. And so the film is playing with the idea of exhibition. And there's clearly a sort of rift in their marriage and in their relationship. And it's all centred around the fact that they've decided they've got to move out of this house, which has been their sort of nest, the centre of their lives. And she doesn't really want to go, he wants to go. And that's basically the basis of the film. When I was watching the film, I realised that it's actually quite funny. But a lot of people, when they go and see an art film, they don't want to laugh, they think they should take it seriously. But this is not a po-faced film, it's actually quite amusing. There's some very hilarious sequences in it. And one sequence, she phones up on this intercom they have, and she goes, "Hello, I'm cold." And he goes, "Well, put a sweater on then." And she goes, "Oh yeah, I thought of that." And it's just, I thought that was funny, but no one in the cinema was laughing, right? It's a sort of black comedy about the sort of the pretensions, but also the beauty of conceptual artists. And I think it's a very good film, and I don't know. I still think it's Joan Hogg's best film, and it's her most rigorously experimental film. It's her most out there film, and I really like it, and I recommend it wholeheartedly. Now, the next film I want to recommend, I also don't have on DVD or Blu-ray. Only one film by this director is available on Blu-ray in the UK. It's called Norte at the End of History. The director is Lav Diaz, a Filipino filmmaker who is one of the most heroic filmmakers of our time. He makes these gigantic films that he likes to show without intervals. Some of them are about 9 hours long, and that's why they don't get distributed in the UK. And they are all sort of sagas about the way that the Marcos regime in the Philippines destroyed the country and the scar, the legacy it's left behind. The film that I'm going to choose is the film that followed Norte at the End of History, which has got the rather clumsy title of From What Is Before. I saw all 6 hours of this film without a break at the National Film Theatre in London. Come on. Oh yes, didn't even go to the toilet. So I think that's a sort of, a little medal I should get that there. And it's an extraordinary film. It's based on the idea that what Marcos and his regime did, like a lot of other totalitarian regimes, is that they spread unrest and disaffection and petty rivalries within the local area so that it allows a regime to come in and seem to provide stability. So what you're watching is this remote fishing village in a very remote part of the Philippines, and the activists come in to sort of stir up resentment between people and get villages against each other and this sort of thing. And eventually the army comes in and the regime establishes itself. I don't think I've ever seen any other film show that better. It's a very the whole film is done in long sequence shots, so it's very slow. It's like sort of slow cinema. And then slowly this terrible dread comes in, seeping into this beautiful landscape amongst these sort of everyday farmers and peasants. And I don't think I've ever seen that sense so brilliantly shown and corralled in a film. It's a really great piece of work, and I highly recommend it. If you can get hold of it anywhere, if you can stream it anywhere, it's well worth seeing. I'm going to finish today with Story of My Death. Now, Albert Serra, I've spoken about him many times in my videos. Robert Hughes, the Australian art critic, has often spoken about the shock of the new, something brand new, something completely different coming into art and just shattering all your previous ideas about it, right? It doesn't happen very often. It happened to me in about 2008 when I went to the London Film Festival and I saw a film called Birdsong, El Cant des Ocells in Catalan, I think. And it's about the Magi, the three kings who go to visit the baby Jesus. And you just watch these three kings wandering around the desert, not knowing where they're going, sort of falling out with each other, bickering, looking at some rock formations. Again, slow cinema. And I thought it was extraordinary. I'd never seen anything like it. The atmosphere was added to by this kind of weirdly groaning air conditioning in the London National Film Theatre, which actually added to the movie. And it's a movie that just ends with this long shot at night time of these three men. Just, you don't even know what they're doing. They're just standing at the end of this road and you're just watching them from a distance. Very curious. And I was like, who is this filmmaker? And to my amazement, I found out that his first film, Honour of the Knights, based on Don Quixote, was actually available on DVD in Britain. My God, the British distributors actually recognising great cinema for a change. So I watched it and I got that shock of the new. I thought, this is a filmmaker who's come out of nowhere and has completely recalibrated cinema. You know, that's how I felt about Honour of the Knights. I felt about that way about every single one of Seurat's films since then. This was his third major feature film. And you will not have seen a film like this. It's extraordinary. It's about the meeting of Casanova and Dracula. I mean, I could just leave it there, right? What else do you need to know? But Casanova is played by this, I think he's a sort of teacher that Seurat found and just put him in his film. And he's this really sort of, he's a kind of hilarious roue, you know, an old rogue. And he sticks his head up girls' skirts and looks at their bottom, and it's just bizarre. At one point he's shagging this girl and he bashes his head through a window. It was a moment actually when I was watching it at the cinema for the first time. I was dropping asleep a bit, you know. It's quite a slow, languorous film, and that sort of woke me up with a start, and I nearly spilt my Coke all over myself. And then he goes out into the country, and he's with this kind of farm family, and he's trying to seduce the two girls, and then Dracula appears. And suddenly the film goes into a strange twilight phase. It's very odd. It's really Seurat investigating a subject and a period of history that seems to fascinate him and obsess him. The movement from the Enlightenment of the 1700s into the Romanticism of the post-French Revolution in the early 1800s. I've never seen anything like it. It has sequences that will stay with you forever. It's funny, it's weird, it's frustrating, it's bonkers, and somehow, out of it all, it's profound. Seurat has said that he doesn't really like horror films, but it is a kind of brilliant addition to the horror film, but from a completely strange, one-off direction. I love this film. I cannot recommend it enough. I'm worried that not many people will enjoy it, though, as much as me, but I think it's a one-off masterpiece. Okay, that's it for today. I'll see you in part 3. Thanks very much.